Hello and welcome to the 100 Jobs Project. I'm your host, Katie Monson-Gant, and thank you so much for being here today and spending a few minutes chatting with me. I hope that you find something from today insightful or interesting or even just entertaining. So today, here's the experience. We'll just give you a little taste of what I want to bring you. Imagine that you were out to lunch with one of your best friends and you hear someone one table over say, "Oh my gosh, I am working on this new project. I'm sending some influencers to the Maldives. They're going to stay in these gorgeous overwater bungalows. They have their own little private plunge pool and they can jump right off into the sea. And there's this cute little glass cutout where they can see all the fishes swimming underneath them." You're sitting at that table and your ears are perking up. You are leaning a little bit closer to hear what they're saying next to you. You're sipping your drink a little bit slower, you're eating your food a little bit slower, and you're not talking to your friend because you are trying to soak up every word of this Emily in Paris job that is next to you. I mean, who sends influencers to the Maldives and gets paid to do it? That was actually me. So that's what I want to share with you today. I worked for one of the world's largest travel companies, and among a lot of other things, I sent influencers all over the world. I worked on a lot of projects in the social realm and a lot of projects where I got to shape brand perception. So stick with me. You are getting that experience of going to lunch and getting to overhear a conversation about, working in this glamorous world of travel. But in this inaugural episode, I also want to talk about what the 100 Jobs Project is. The TLDR version is that I'm interviewing 100 people about what they do for work and how they make it work. I want to talk with real people in real jobs about what their life looks like every day and how they are living well. There are so many podcasts and articles and interviews out there with experts and CEOs and gazillionaires, which, to be fair, you can learn a lot from those. I learn a lot from those, but I also feel like it perpetuates this cycle of keeping up with the Joneses in a career sense, where you start to feel this pressure to do something massive. If you're not the world's foremost cardiovascular surgeon, or you are not inventing and building and scaling the next hero cosmetics company, those are the little zip patches that you wear. They built that and sold it for $630 million within 5 years. And so you start to hear a lot of things like that, and it makes you feel like you're not doing enough, which is absolutely not true. The majority of people are not doing that. They are never going to do that. And they don't even, probably a lot of them don't even want to do that. There is a lot of fulfillment that people find from going on a family camping trip, or going on a girls' trip with some of your best friends, exploring a new place, or watching the Great British Baking Show on your couch with your dog. That's actually something that I am doing right now. I think this current season will be over by the time this podcast comes out. I'm a few episodes behind. I don't know what's happening, but I just think Justine is fabulous, and I love that she has accepted her alopecia and celebrates that, and I just think she is beautiful. Back to the podcast and what this project is. Of course, I would love to and probably will talk to different founders and people who are rich and have made a name for themselves in their fields about what they do and what their lives are like. But I want that with a reality check. I want to find out, what is it like to be an accountant in Kansas City, or a midwife in California, or an interior designer in Jackson Hole. I want to hear from people who are living not in New York and LA about what they are doing and how they are prioritizing fun time and their interests and their passions and their hobbies in their life, and how they're also finding success and fulfillment in their career. This idea came to me about a year ago. My life has changed a lot in the past few years in a way that I didn't, ways that I didn't totally expect. I had this kind of path and career trajectory for myself, and a few years ago, I had a baby and things just shifted for me. And I was in grad school, and I'm still in grad school. I'm finishing grad school right now, but I just found myself at the gym in the middle of the work week, and I was looking around thinking, don't all these people work? It is 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. What are you doing here at the gym? And I wanted to talk with everyone and just find out what they were doing. And that was when the idea for the 100 Jobs Project was born. Again, talking to real people about their lives. I've always been a bit of a dreamer. Sometimes I find myself having the grass is greener syndrome, where I will spend more time wondering, what if I quit my job and go to hair school or become a masseuse and open a luxury spa? Or what if I go to med school or become a lawyer? All of those are like very vastly different things on vastly different spectrums. Or I'll see people on TikTok, like the girl who has a laundromat. I don't know if you've seen her, but just fascinating. Quit her job to run a laundromat. I saw a girl the other day who is like a gardener and goes and takes care of really rich people's plants. And I think that is cool. That's never anything that I ever would have known about or considered. But I see things like this and I find myself wondering, what would my life be like if I did this? So if that sounds at all like you, you are in the right place to explore all of these whims alongside me. And, even if that doesn't sound like you and you're just nosy and curious about what people do, you are also in the right place. I'm planning to talk with mostly women, mostly early to mid-career professionals. So if you are considering a job change, or you're navigating a big life event, or even if you are just early in college and trying to figure out what to do and you don't know a lot about a lot of the jobs that are out here, hopefully this project helps you figure out those crossroads in your life and how work fits into that. That said, while I would love for this to help somebody, I also kind of don't care if nobody listens. I mean, I would love for people to, but this is just a personal project that came to me again a year or so ago and has just been nagging at me to do. And so benefiting anybody else is just icing along the cake. And I really hope that it does, and that you were able to take away something interesting from me talking with a lot of real people about what they do. Let's go back to that Emily in Paris job. Honestly, my job was very Emily in Paris, just without the whole Eiffel Tower and no notable love triangles, and my clothing budget was way smaller because I was working an entry-level job. But how did I get there? As I sit and reflect, probably all started when I became a lifeguard at the age of 16. Okay, bad joke, I'm sorry. But I do think that some of those early jobs can help you learn a lot of really important skills. I was a lifeguard, I worked at a clothing store in high school as well, and then I went on to college. I came from a family where college was prioritized. My dad went to college. My dad's a dentist, and neither of my parents came from especially affluent families, but they were able to create much better lives for themselves and their parents before them by prioritizing school. And so that was something that was really emphasized to me as, this is a path that is going to be really good for you. I think that path can be really good for a lot of people. It is absolutely not the only path. And I am so interested in talking with people who have not taken that path and are finding a lot of fulfillment in what they do. That was the case for me. So I moved from Montana. I grew up in Montana. I'm the oldest child of 5 kids. I moved to Utah for school. And at the time, I actually thought that I was going to go into medicine, and just in some realm, medicine or physical therapy. And I was kind of on that journey and starting to take some of the prereqs for those classes. And they just, I don't know, it wasn't totally landing with me. And I took some advice. I really took some advice to heart from like a spiritual setting that I needed to explore different things. And so toward the end of my freshman year, I took all sorts of different classes, and I had this really, really good feeling in this media class that I was in, and I decided to just keep doing that and pursuing that. After my freshman year, I did a mission trip, came back, met the boy who I later married and is now my husband for years and years. We did get married when we were babies, and luckily it has worked out pretty well. But after we met, I studied abroad in London over the summer. I came back and did my next year of school, and I was doing my prerequisites to go into my school's public relations program. I was minoring in sociology, and in the last semester before I was accepted into the PR program, so you did have to do an application, I was in a class with a professor who was really highly regarded in the program, and he told everyone that we needed to have 5 internships by the time we were graduated from college if we wanted to get a job at a top firm. So you have to recognize that I was 2 years into school at this point, and at this point I was working at a campus job in an advisement center. I was a secretary, and then I was a student advisor. I worked 2 jobs for a little bit at one point while I was in college too. I delivered pizzas, actually. delivered pizzas and worked at the advisement center. But I sat in that class and I was like trying to do the math of how am I going to get 5 internships by the time that I am done? Like there's not necessarily a lot of money to be had in the marketing and PR world at the time. You were like potentially looking to get out of school making like $35,000, which is not a lot to live on, even less to live on today in this economy with all of our inflation that we have had. I was just trying to figure out how am I going to do this, and I started looking for and taking every possible job or opportunity that I could find. My now husband and I, we went to Kansas City for a summer. He had a job there that he was doing, and I found a marketing internship in Kansas City doing marketing for an air turbine filtration system. That was a very, very weird internship, but I had a great manager. His name was Jim, and he was actually the first person to ever tell me that I always need to negotiate my salary, and that has served me well. There's some statistic I mentioned, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I'm in grad school right now getting my MBA at Georgetown University here in DC. That's where I live. I probably should have mentioned that. I'm actually not technically in DC. I'm in Northern Virginia, so I'm in the suburbs, but I'm close enough that I go in person for classes. You can look up different stats on this and do the math, but even the difference in like a $3,000 in your salary really early on can lead to hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars even later on in your career, as that adds up exponentially, and as you have opportunities for compounding interest, and as you have more opportunities for promotions and raises. Thank you, Jim, for telling me to always negotiate my salary. And if you have not heard that advice, I'm guessing you probably have. Always negotiate, even though it can be kind of dicey sometimes. I'm also in a negotiations class right now, so I don't know if you ever want any negotiations info, I guess hit me up. Maybe we'll have to do like a little sidebar episode on that. Back to the story. I did that internship, came back. I worked at a digital marketing agency that year instead of being back at the student advisement center. That was my junior year. I was probably working 30 hours a week in that role, taking classes full time. I also started volunteering for our school's hockey team. They didn't have a lot of staff. Yeah, my husband played hockey, and so that was like kind of a way to be like in there, and then also like, you know, we wanted to support the team. I had a friend who did that with me, and she was phenomenal. She runs the Sports-ish now, so look her up on Instagram, give her a little follow. But yeah, back in our college days, we were doing that together. Moving on, the next summer I did like any random internship I could find. I did like a marketing PR internship at a hospital. I did like a 10-hour-a-week internship with the math department. At one point, I found something where I was like cold calling Vietnam vets on a registry for this like statewide project where we were collecting stuff for like the state Library of Congress. I was maybe going to go to the real Library of Congress, like looking for their stories and photos and everything. I was like this young naive girl driving up to biker bars to try to interview people. I was really just scraping for anything. And then my senior year, I had my big break, if you will, where I actually started my first salary role. There's a company called InsideSales.com. I think they've been bought and sold a few times now, and their name may have changed, but they offered me a role doing social media management full time, and I snatched that up. I switched to night classes. I only had a couple classes that I really needed to finish at that point, and I threw myself into that job. I loved being in a startup environment, and I think that was really helpful for me in one of my early roles, to be able to have some flexibility and autonomy to try some different things. This is also in some of the earlier days of, not like the really early days of social media, but a lot of companies were just kind of figuring out like, hey, we can use this too. And like we were figuring out we could use influencers and everything. And so I got to implement a lot of that. I got to implement a lot of ads, and I got to work on some PR and comms projects there as well. So you're probably thinking, this does not sound like sending influencers to the Maldives, and I am getting to that, I promise. I graduated with my bachelor's in communications. I had an emphasis in PR, a minor in sociology, And with all of this, different people get jobs in different ways, but I did not have a lot of family connections or industry experience. And we moved to DC. I was had gotten married at the time, and my husband had a job opportunity out in DC, and I was like, you know what, there's a lot more opportunities for PR and marketing in the DC area than there probably are in Utah or Montana. So we came out here. I had a friend slash a professor, actually the professor who told me that we needed 5 internships. That professor had a connection at Marriott, and it was a friend of mine who told me, hey, this professor has this connection. I know that you just moved out to DC. Maybe you should apply to this role. Great friend, because she was also submitting her resume. And so it was kind of a weird 2 friends submitting resumes to the same job. To be fair, she had not moved to DC, and I don't think she was super planning on it. I got the job. She did not, but it all worked out, and we're still friends. Actually, she did much later on move out to this area, and we're getting lunch in a couple weeks, and I'm very excited to see her and chat with her. Back to how did I get to sending influencers out? This was not my first job at Marriott, unfortunately, the influencer thing. I had another job, and it was really cool. Marriott at the time had these social media command centers. There were 5 of them all around the world, with the one at the headquarters in the DC area being the primary one. Our responsibilities spanned everything from trend spotting to, supporting marketing people who are working on properties, to supporting the people who were working in social and marketing on the corporate brand side. We did some crisis comms and crisis identification, and that actually turned into one of the things that I think is the coolest, one of the cooler things I did at Marriott back in 2018. This was not cool for the company, kind of cool for me. 2018, Marriott had a massive data breach, impacted over 500 million people. And just think worst case scenario for a company data breach. It's not just names, but it's credit card info, it's passport info. Obviously, we all found out it happened, but we didn't know that anything was going on. And one day, my boss's boss, our VP essentially, called my whole team into this room, and he said, everyone, I need you to clear your calendars for the next couple of weeks. And Katie, I need you in here in the office Friday morning at 4 a.m. Spend the night in the hotel across the street so that you don't have to worry about missing an alarm or anything, or if we need you earlier, but you need to be in here at 4 a.m. And so we all kind of looked at each other. I did the whole thing. I got there at 4 a.m. and I walk into this room at headquarters, 4 a.m. Friday, and there's just a handful of senior leaders there. I think there were 7 or 8 of us in the room, and me, this young, fresh out of college, kind of scared worker bee. And they said, look, we've kept this really under wraps. There was a massive data breach, and we are informing the public. Part of my role was this crisis identification. Didn't usually take a lot of my time, but because I knew how the software worked, I was the one who ended up being really responsible for scraping the internet and looking for things that people were saying. It wasn't me all on my own. I ended up being one of the task force leads, and we probably had, 100 or so people in this task force that worked around the clock. We started doing shift work for a couple of months, just making sure, first and foremost, that everyone who was reaching out to the company with concerns, that those were being addressed. And we had this whole process and protocol, as companies do, for handling that and for directing people to find the right information. But also, if someone shared something or someone published something in an article that was highlighting a new problem or a new challenge or a weak point in our response, it would be my job to then escalate that and work with our crisis comms team and senior leadership to identify and craft the right response to that. So that was incredible crisis management experience really early in my career that I will probably always look back on and be like, wow, that was a pretty cool thing that I got to do. I was in the room where it happened, the Marriott data breach announcement, and yeah, sorry to everyone that may have been impacted by that. Hopefully it's been long enough that it is not a super sore spot. Was actually, if you want some extra lore on this, Marriott had bought a different hotel company like a few years prior, and it was actually like an existing issue with that company that that Marriott had bought, and it had been ongoing like since before the acquisition. Just nobody knew about it. After Marriott bought the company, they were like, oh crap, there is an issue here. Still love Marriott, of course. Had spent a lot of years there. In this same office where I did crisis comms, when I wasn't doing crisis comms, I was doing surprise and delights, which was a really fun thing that I was able to do with our loyalty program, Marriott Rewards, and then it's now Marriott Bonvoy. I would work on the Bonvoy social account, and whenever the company was sponsoring like really big, cool events, I would then invite some of our loyalty members who were sharing photos or experiences in and around the area where those events were going on. I would then invite them to come to those events, and I would hire film crews and film the whole process. And then those videos would go on to, I know, this is getting kind of convoluted. Those videos would go on to like in-room TV. So if you walk into a hotel room and there's like a fancy little video playing, some of those were videos that I made a handful of years ago of loyalty members getting really cool perks for being a loyalty member. And some of those cool perks took me all around the world to different events. I went to food and wine festivals in South Beach, Miami, in Charleston. I went to Final Four in Minneapolis. I went to Coachella. I got VIP access to Coachella. And I think the coolest trip of all, I got to go to this music festival that we were hosting at the W Hotel in Dubai. Look up that hotel. It is stunning. While I was in Dubai, I actually ended up going to a ton of our different properties. And there's a lot of really cool hotels in Dubai. I think that the hotels, because I stayed at 2 different hotels in Dubai, and I think that those both may have been like some of the coolest hotels I have ever stayed at in my life, hands down. I think Charlie XCX may have actually performed at one of those. There was a couple different festivals that W Hotels hosted that I went to. Betty Who performed at one. I think I have a signed hat from Betty Who, which is kind of fun. I digress. But like I did some cool stuff there, and I haven't even gotten to the influencer stuff yet. So after I had spent a while in that role, I then leaned on my social media management background that I had from my previous role and kind of catapulted myself up into doing brand social. I did brand social initially for Westin Hotels and Le Méridien Hotels. That was a lot of fun. Westin was like this really health-focused brand. Le Méridien was like this mid-century modern, very chic brand with French heritage. And so I got to dive into that. And this is kind of where the story gets a little bit dicey, because I had gotten into that role. I was feeling like I was getting my feet under me, and then the pandemic happened. Basically, everyone in the marketing department was gone overnight. And so I went to a company in the DC area that did real estate development and worked with them for a little while. That was not totally my thing, at least on the marketing front for them. And so I moved back to Marriott about a year later. Once they started opening roles again, I reapplied. I had a totally different team, different boss, but I was doing really similar work. I was, again, managing social for not just 2 brands this time, but I was working across all of their select and premium brands, which is probably just jargon to you, but it was about like 20 brands that I was working on. That was a lot. And that was where I really got back to working with influencers, working with some of the teams that would help us with our day-to-day social content, because when you're juggling 20 brands, you're not necessarily the person who is behind the accounts posting every single day. Pre-pandemic, I was the person who was posting every single day. But there was also a lot of other projects, hiring photographers and videographers and sending them to different places to take photos, planning their photo shoots, sometimes, going myself and being on photo shoots. Those were always a lot of fun. The influencer work was work that I really loved too. We would have an idea for a campaign, or, this is what we want to share. And part of my job would be to then help draft contracts and make sure that everything was tied up there, and then working on the creative briefs. The creative briefs I thought were so fun. We had this whole process where, and most people who are working in the influencer space do, where you put these documents together, or you're telling people about the company, and you talk about key messages that you'd love for them to share, and how you want the look and feel of everything to be, and what your ideal shot list is. And then you go back and forth and you work with them while they're on property capturing content or doing whatever else you hired them for. And I loved getting to do that part of my work. I sent people all over the world. I know I mentioned the Maldives a couple times. I think I actually sent people there twice, but I sent people to Bali, to Australia, to basically every country in Europe that you can imagine. I sent people to some weird places in the US too. I think we did Cincinnati. I then moved into a role where I was doing brand management for autograph collection hotels, tribute portfolio hotels. Those are some boutique offerings that Marriott has, and I absolutely loved that role. I loved getting to move into a place where I'd been managing the brands in a lot of ways and what the perception of the brand was, but then I started getting to manage the experience of the brand on the inside. How was someone interacting from every step of the journey with this brand. And I felt like I was loving that. I absolutely loved bringing in brand management. And I wasn't in that brand management role for an especially long time, but it also felt like I had been in it for ages, because it was really an extension of what I had been doing on the brand social side. It was very intuitive and a very natural role for me to go into. Day to day, hours were really long. It was absolutely the corporate grind. And while those things that I just mentioned were highlights, that was not what I was doing on a day to day. Those were more one-off special occasion type things that you would work up towards. I always felt like I was juggling a million projects at once. We had really, really lean teams. And in some ways, I may have become a little bit bitter or jaded, or just kind of learned this lesson that corporate doesn't really care about you. I know that sounds harsh. The people care about you, but if something were to happen and you were to be unavailable to work, corporate is going to replace you within a matter of days or weeks or months. Everyone is replaceable in a corporate setting. So in that sense, corporate doesn't totally care about you, but the people do. While I was there, I learned a handful of other helpful lessons. Connections really do get you places. And if you don't have them, you can make them. Again, I think back to the job that I had at that tech startup, the brand shop internship that I did. That all led to my Marriott job, and then my COVID job, and even my Marriott job again. All of those things happened because I knew people. I think I don't know if I mentioned this when I was talking about the tech company job that I had, but I actually got that because a friend referred me. A friend was working in the sales department at that company. A role opened up and he said, "Hey, Katie, I think that you would be great at this, and that this is something that might be up your alley as far as career stuff." And so that happened. One of the brand shop internship that I mentioned, I went to this public relations student conference in Boston. There was a woman who spoke there. I approached her afterwards, told her how much I a few things that I appreciated from her speech. She gave me her contact information and invited me to come back and do this little internship, coaching, mentorship thing that she had. My Marriott job, again, happened through a friend or a professor. My COVID job that I had was actually my old boss, her husband, all of these things. My Marriott job, again, when I came back, it was with a totally different team, but I still had some different connections who were able to highlight that. I'm freelancing right now, and even who I'm freelancing for, that came because of people that I met in situations where I put myself out there. So I really did learn that if you don't have connections, you can absolutely make them. Just reaching out to someone in an industry or a job that you are interested in is so important. I mean, you don't necessarily have to hound people for jobs. In fact, that usually has the opposite result from what you would want. But asking to learn from people and seeing if there's anything that you can do for them can really take you so far. Don't forget how cool you are. Like sometimes, like I know that might sound silly, but I found that sometimes I have like discounted my own experience or my own ideas either because I was the youngest person in the room, or a myriad of other things. But just because you are the youngest person in the room or you are around other people who have done other cool stuff, that doesn't make the cool stuff that you have done any less meaningful or impactful. So don't forget that. I am not going to forget that. I've also learned in a sense that like big companies don't mean anything. Of course, my life and my career would have been different if I had stayed in a startup environment. I didn't. So there is some weight to, I don't know. You can get into more doors if you have a big company name on your resume, but that doesn't necessarily make you a better person or smarter or more qualified. I think the same can be said for schools too. It's interesting, like in my different roles and things, I've started to meet more people who have gone to Harvard or gone to Wharton or gone to Northwestern or gone to Georgetown, and or not just schools too, but big companies, people who work for Amazon and for Google. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are smarter than you. It's just a reflection of different life experiences, different connections. Sometimes it means they're smarter than you, but not always. No one is inherently better than someone else because they have a certain school name or a certain title or a certain company name on their resume. That has been one thing that has really, really stuck with me. The list could go on and on and on and on. You can't plan for everything. Definitely couldn't plan for things like the data breach or even where I am right now. I alluded to the fact that I didn't work in my brand management role for a very long time. I had a baby and I am clinically insane because I started my Georgetown MBA program about 5 weeks later. It's a part-time program. They have a full-time program. It's the part-time is the exact same program as the full-time. You're taking the same classes from the same professors. You were just doing it in the evening and over 3 to 5 years instead of 2 years. While I had a baby, my mat leave ended up turning into freelancing. I made the choice not to go back. A baby and work travel and school was more than I thought it was going to be. And so in my brain, I started school thinking, well, I'm going to go back to work. I'm going to go back to my corporate job. We were doing everything. Like I had daycare forms filled out. I had been doing nanny interviews and it just wasn't feeling right. Part of that was also my baby I didn't totally realize at the time, but he was very, very colicky. And so that's like some of the nanny stuff just wasn't working out. And it wasn't necessarily like anyone's fault. He was just a hard baby. And, what an incredible privilege that I was able to take a step back from that role and start freelancing. All of that said, it was just a very different place than I thought that I would be in. And so that's how I found myself at the gym at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, because the gym turned into my childcare and also, of course, a time to take care of myself. As I've, kind of transitioned my whole life over the past few years, I've just become really interested in what people are doing and trying to figure out what is next for me. Along with lessons learned, I've absolutely learned that priorities shift, life shifts, and it's so important to roll with things. There's always going to be this push and pull of moving where life takes you and always trying to be or have a little bit of direction of where the current is going. If I told you that, I worked at Marriott and I have a Georgetown MBA, almost, that sounds impressive and pretentious, but I really do just feel like a normal girl who doesn't have it all figured out. And so if you are in any way, shape, or form trying to figure it out, I hope that you will join me in the future to figure it out with me. What we're learning about careers and balance and finding our different paths through life, and also prioritizing what we love and what we want to do as well. So that is me. That is my whole story, and I hope that you have learned something from that today. just a little bit about what you can expect from the show moving forward, because obviously not every episode is going to be me telling you about my life experience. I will be interviewing different people in different jobs. I have some really exciting interviews lined up. I'm talking with a dermatology PA, I'm talking with a therapist, I'm talking with a teacher, I'm talking with someone who works in recruiting. I've got a lot of cool things lined up and a few other things that are in the pipeline. Tune in weekly on Wednesdays, and just, we are casual, we are curious, we are fun, we are inspiring here. We're trying to get a little bit of a midweek pick me up in there for you. Subscribe or follow so that you don't miss our first interview episode, and stick with me. I will get better and better at interviewing, I promise, the more that we do this. Feel free to share this with a friend who is figuring out their path. Reach out and tell me if you have a job that you want to talk about, or if there is a job that you want to hear about. And you can find me at 100jobsproject.com. That is 100jobsproject.com. You can find me on Instagram at the same place, 100jobsproject. All of that said, thank you again for hanging out with me for a little bit today. I hope that you find success wherever life takes you, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks.